All right, let's talk about disagree and commit.
Well, I think it encompasses a lot of what we think about when we think about conducting business with people who are not clones of ourselves.
I'm Campbell Baron, and this video is an extension of the Levels Culture documentation series as it pertains to the practice of disagree and commit, what that looks like, and the impact it has on the Levels culture. Is what this video is all about. So what does disagree and commit mean to you?
I think at its best, it's an attempt to say, let's all contribute, but then find a time to move in the right direction.
Right.
Up until the point of decision, everyone should voice disagreement and they should bring up all of the reasons to or not to do something. But once a decision has been made, you need to not only allow the project to proceed, but also advocate for it as if it is your position.
Mm-hmm. What disagree and commit is not, and where I think it can be confused, is that it's not about biting your tongue about potential ideas or strategies that you have that might be different than other people's opinions.
I see.
In my last company at Cardash, we as a team made a decision to move forward on a particular direction. I did not agree with that direction. People on the team would ask me, like, why did we decide to go this way? I don't think this is a good idea. And I would say, like, well, that's what they decided. And like, if you have any questions, talk to them. And I didn't realize how toxic that was.
Mm-hmm. You end up with, I think, situations where people are half-heartedly committing to things they disagree with and or potentially trying to continuously undermine them.
It's not even just not bad-mouthing decisions, it's actively going out of your way to support it and just trusting that the people that made that decision had the best intention in mind.
So to what extent is disagree and commit essentially a byproduct of velocity?
That's a good question. If you want to move quickly, you need to have a mechanism to break down gridlock.
We strive really hard to avoid what's referred to as like a consensus trap.
And I think with such an ambitious goal to fix the metabolic health crisis, we want to be as efficient as possible. And so it's worth it to sacrifice some of your own disagreements for the betterment of the company and velocity going forward.
Things like our memo culture is, I think, a very pragmatic tool set that's involved in this.
So speaking of memos, let's talk about a real example of disagree and commit at Levels, the infamous transparency decision.
When Sam started to pull back the curtain on his perspective on transparency and how he wanted to share the investor updates, all but publicly, I was kind of like, I was confused to the extent of concern.
I came from the medical world where privacy and secrecy is everything. So coming into a company where we are now going to put all of our strategic documents and our most brilliant thoughts just out into the public seemed pretty bold and potentially risky.
I fundamentally disagreed with it, and I came from a background in engineering that did not allow you to share anything. It was borderline criminal.
Josh was in the opposition of the idea. I think Casey was in like the neutral camp.
And where did you fall, Sam?
I'm often the furthest on the spectrum for these things. And
I decided to disagree and commit on this one. But I remember this as one of the most challenging moments.
We really did it initially as an experiment. And it's one of those things where we did it for a little while. We started to see the massive positive effects.
And what we saw was an immediate positive response from investors, from our network, from partners. It was a flywheel that was starting.
It was opening up doors to people who want to work for us. It was getting more feedback about the app.
And over time, not only have I seen the benefits to the organization, but I've seen the benefits to my own mentality about how I communicate, with whom, and under what circumstances.
And that's where the notion of what it means to publicly commit actually becomes much more relevant.
So to me, the transparency decision seems like a very extreme decision, a once-in-a-company decision. Can you recall any examples of disagree and commit in the day-to-day?
The ones that comes to mind for me are going full court press on a podcast, an in-house podcast.
The idea to do it very quickly and scrappy without a lot of planning and forethought and production is the first place where my natural reaction is to go like, whoa, wait, we can't do that. We got to plan it out. We got to think about it, right?
Sure.
The health space is already so saturated with podcasts. Why are we trying to reinvent the wheel?
But to me, the commit side of that was I ultimately go, look, this is Ben's project to run. He's actually got a lot more experience than I do in this space.
Yeah.
We agreed to run an experiment of like having a company podcast. And it turned out that it was actually useful.
I am now like the chief evangelist of each of these projects.
Your thinking has evolved.
Absolutely. My thinking has evolved.
One of the norms that Netflix has is you should not say anything to another person that you would not say to their face. If I was to tell you, like, man, can you believe that Ben did such and such? The automatic response you should give is, no. What did he say when you brought that up to him directly?
Right.
Every conversation we have is really transparent. Everyone's heard. Everyone's opinion is taken into account. A general consensus is reached. And then even if I still disagree with a decision, like I'm still going to put 100% into this project.
And what about consequences? So if I convince my fellow coworker to disagree and commit, and that project that I'm leading and spearheading fails, how does one ensure that I am not penalized?
If you have a culture that rewards experimentation, then that generally won't happen. In fact, the opposite will usually happen.
Right.
I don't necessarily like the terminology of failure because in a lot of ways, most of these are not actually failures. They're more like an experiment with a negative result.
If something goes wrong, we don't go and reanalyze that decision. That is not helpful to the company. Failure is not going to be something that is used against anyone.
If you want that buy-in on disagree and commit,
Yep.
you just need the other side of that coin, which is we need to have good examples of us actually changing gears when things aren't going as planned.
If we gave the project to Ben and he totally fumbled it and it reduced our confidence in his ability to execute, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. If he runs the experiment and it's just like, oh, turns out nobody cares about this podcast. Like, all right, next. That's it.
I haven't encountered that point where I worry about the end result being something catastrophic. Even if I personally disagree with it, I think I'll approach it in the mindset of I still have a lot to learn and I'm willing to roll with it because I trust that they're making the right decision.
Now, where's the line with disagree and commit? There must be a line.
I think criminal behavior is probably one.
Fair.
Where you have like significant ethical concerns. If they're doing something that's evil, call the police. Go take it to the authorities.
It's really hard to make this a binary. There'll always be edge cases.
Where I don't think it necessarily applies is existential core values of a company. How you operate on an ethical or value-based level. That's where there might just actually be a fundamental mismatch between a person working at the company and the rest of the team, and where it would be much more challenging to disagree and commit.
I don't know that there's any instances in which the philosophy is not relevant. But again, I think if we look at how it plays out, the nuances, the sort of boundaries of it,
I see.
I think there are some natural limits to that.
If you are not honoring disagree and commit in the right way, then it'll kind of insert these fractures in the team and eventually just self-implode. It's more important to use it as a value to maintain team camaraderie and team respect and team integrity.
Now, when Levels has 300 people, each coming from their own backgrounds with their own ideas and experiences, how does this not just fall apart?
Yeah, it can. It's still TBD. I think the way that most companies do is really making sure everyone in leadership is on the same page with cultural values. One of the CIA's sabotage books was published, and you can see there's like 10 tactics for how to sabotage an organization from the inside. And one of them is to constantly bring things back up for discussion.
Right. And David, you've seen this practice scale at Google, so what does that look like?
In some ways, it's almost like improv or jazz, but in a clunky machine that only gets clunkier and crazier and more rusty over time as you add more people. And
if you're having to remind people of disagree and commit, then you're probably not doing your job well enough.
I think when it stops being productive and efficient, then it falls apart, for sure.
Why is disagree and commit so important as it pertains to the Levels culture?
I think it is especially painful for us if we don't get it right because of the async and remote nature of things.
I don't think that asynchronous companies can operate effectively without some layer of disagree and commit that everyone buys into.
I've certainly learned, and I'm still learning, to let go of things like ego and perfection, because at the end of the day, it's in pursuit of health, and that's what everyone here is passionate about.
Every individual is an individual and thinks about things differently in the context of their past experience and perspective. And so you're never going to have perfect, complete agreement with any individual ever. And that's something you can't ignore that. You can't just assume that a company is going to be a symphony of perfect orchestration without having some overarching principle.